As for the sample tray, if you're trying to get samples in and out, there's a little thing here and you can just take this guy off. So samples go in a slot that's numbered, which you'll refer to later when you go into the software. Okay, this has a cooler in it, so it's refrigerated. I would be careful whenever you put this in, you want to make sure it hits the back of the auto sampler, because otherwise the auto sampler thinks the tray is missing. So you just want to push it in until you hear it kind of click in place. This closes, it's magnetic. That's everything you're going to need to do with these guys. This should always be connected as long as the software is open. This is always on, it's always cooling, and it's an auto sampler, so it kind of does its own thing, so you don't need to worry about actually doing anything except loading your samples. So for these three, this is the pump that pumps the solvent into your sample through the system. This is a fairly old pump. It's made by a company called Nauer, which is German, which was acquired by some American company recently. And there's no service representatives for it. So if something goes wrong with a Nauer instrument, it's kind of up to us to figure out what's wrong, which kind of sucks, but it's the way it is. This pump is pretty straightforward. I've never really had a problem with it, except one time the belt broke and I just had to go in and replace the belt myself. The refractive index detector is also made by Nauer. This right now is not currently working properly. The software picks up that it's there. It shows a signal on the software, but something isn't right with the detector, like it's not picking up anything and the baseline drift is really crazy. I've literally spent like a year trying to get this fixed with like trying to find service reps, nothing. So this, just be patient with it. We don't use it generally. I just keep it on when I turn everything else on just to be consistent. And I think Dr. Yu is probably going to end up purchasing an RI detector from Shimadzu, which is what everything else in the system is. So that's just for you to know. The on and off button is just a switch on the back left, which you can just turn on. And then you can also zero the RI detector by pressing and holding this. I think we have an instructions manual for this, either on the computer or around in here that I can show you guys if you're ever interested in actually going into the different options for flushing the detector. We can go over that separately. So the UV detector, which is on the bottom, is also made by Shimadzu. This is the detector that we use most frequently. This one is nice because you can take your samples at multiple wavelengths at once. You can do 2 wavelengths at a time maximum. So, for example, I like to run my samples at 225 nanometers, which will pick up everything. 360, which will pick up like benzene ring or aromatic compounds. And then at 405, which is our typical UV wavelength for 3D printing. So I would have to run a sample twice to get all 3 wavelengths, because the first time would only do the first 2, and then the second time would do 405, if that makes sense. And I'll show you how to do that in the software. As for controls on here, the only one you really need to know about is this on and off button, which turns off the entire detector, not just the lamp. So keep that in mind. We also sometimes will use the 0 button, but you can also just zero the detector in the software, so whatever works for you. I find it's nicer not to have to like walk around every time you want to zero it. I generally will keep this on to stabilize it all the time, but make sure that the lamp is turned off, and the lamp has a specific lifetime, so you don't want to, have it running for like overnight or something if you don't need it on. So that's everything here. We have a solvent recycling valve, which is in this little box. This basically it's built in to tell the system when you're done running a sample, stop directing waste into waste and start directing the unused THF back into the bottle, and it just helps us to save solvent, if that makes sense. So, for example, for right now, I've been stabilizing this morning, so it's on an actual method file right now, which means that the waste is directing into the waste container. There's an easy way to check that. So each of these tubes is labeled with where it goes to. So this is the inlet. This is pumping into the pump. The outlet is both this recycle valve, or this recycle tube, and this waste tube. Recycle goes back into the inlet bottle because we can reuse that solvent because it hasn't had any polymer sample in it. And then waste is in the back. To check which one it's currently going through, you can just take it out and you can see it's dripping. That means it's actually directing into that canister. So, as for these guys, they always have to stay in a tub because any waste, as you know, in a chemical laboratory has to be in a secondary container, and this is considered hazardous waste. I just put this in here just in case there is some kind of leak or accident, and I don't want it to like overflow and fill the lab. Generally speaking, for THF, we have a couple bottles here if we can't fit them in our flammable cabinet, which I'll show you. But other than that, that's pretty much everything for these guys. The inlet tube for GPC must not pump air ever. It has to always be completely submerged in this tank, and you can actually see it at the bottom there. So we try to keep this above the level above the bottom of this white label, okay? Because we don't want to risk the GPC pumping air. It can ruin the columns, which are each like 8 grand. It can ruin the detectors. So just something to keep in mind, never pull that out when the pump is working. If you need to switch these tubes into a new THF bottle, all you have to do is hit the start-stop button on the pump, which will it'll stop pumping, and then you can transfer it and then you restart it once it's submerged again. As for the pump, I forgot to mention for the controls, there's start and stop, which stops the pumping, but it keeps the actual like screen on. And then you can adjust the flow rate by hitting plus or minus on these arrows. Right now it's at 2 mils per minute. I'm running it at 2 right now just to get it stabilized, but generally we run it at 1. So whatever works for you is fine, but I would recommend 1 because it makes the math at the end of the process a lot easier. Other than that, we have these 2 tubes that are running down into this bottle. This is in case there's some kind of leak, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And just in case something gets messed up with the detector or the sampler, the excess leak will go down into there. As for this little THF bottle back here, this is connected to the auto sampler, and this supply of THF is only used for cleaning the auto sampling needle. So you always want to make sure that that is above the frit, which is that little gray thing, which is pulling in THF. It uses very little per run, probably on the order of microliters, so that doesn't need to be refilled very often. Other than that, I think that's everything on this side, and then we'll go ahead and check out the software.
I was wondering if, like, how you would shut it down and